Go ahead, man.
Good morning. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. It is 9:03 a.m. The session is set to go until 10 a.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board, joining you via Zoom, and will be in the boardroom shortly. Commissioner or Vice Chair Ty Menser in the boardroom, as well as Commissioner Gary Edwards. We also have County Manager Ramiro Chavez, and this is a follow-up to a public hearing, Development Code Docket Item A-6, Shoreline Master Program Update. This is only an informational session today. So with that, who am I passing this to?
Maybe I can make introductory comments, Madam Chair. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Again, you've received had a public hearing last week, and leading to the public hearing, received significant written public testimony, verbal testimony, and since we have received additional written testimony, which is presented to you today. I will be recommending maybe at the end of this meeting, the board considers receiving formal public written comments today. I think it's very robust public comments they have received, and the staff cannot continue to receive those public comments. At some point, we need to stop. Obviously, you will be receiving testimony and written testimony in your inboxes, but the formal testimony, I will recommend for you to consider stopping today. Because that continues to be in receiving those comments. At some point, we need to move forward on this matter.
You're going to recommend stopping today?
Yeah.
Okay.
So with that in mind, Josh.
Thank you for that, County Manager. Joshua Cummings, Director of Community Planning and Economic Development. Just piggybacking on that statement real quick. Standard course is to stop the public comment period at the end of the public hearing. We recognize that this is a sensitive topic and we wanted to provide that level of flexibility. So thank you to the County Manager for finding a stopping point, but also recognizing that it has, by course, been open a little longer than usual at this time, and appreciate all the input. Also, I'd say in terms of the public hearing, you'll hear more in detail from Andy and Jeremy, but from my perspective, I thought it was interesting, the comments that we received that evening and via email over the past courses of the last few weeks or so. You've heard a wide variety. It's been the setbacks are too much, or they're too far, too little, and we're not going fast enough, or we're going too fast. From my perspective, that wide-ranging variety of comments, they have one thread that runs through them. They're all reasonable and logical and civil. And I really appreciate the community's input on this very difficult topic. This is complicated stuff. If it was easy, it would have been done sooner, but it hasn't been. And we recognize that it's complicated. And so taking the time for the Board of County Commissioners to gather that input, receive it, hear from staff, and recognize that staff's one goal here is to continue to move this item forward at the direction of the Board of County Commissioners. And it sometimes is difficult. You know, we're not public works. We don't get to build roads and bridges. Our product is process. And so what we do in CPED is make sure that the public has an opportunity to engage in the process, and that the Board of County Commissioners follows a process that leads to a good outcome. And so recognize that these back and forth conversations, it may seem like it's kind of dragging on, but our product is processed, and I really appreciate the opportunity to continue to move forward on this topic. So with that, I'll pass it over to Andy or Jeremy.
Actually, I'm just going to turn it right over to Andy so we can get right into giving you a background on what comments were received, the nature of those, next steps, and then of course we look forward to hearing about your concerns and any changes or topics you'd like us to bring forward in the future.
Okay, great. Good morning, Andy DeFobis, Senior Planner with Community Planning and Economic Development. So today we'll do a follow-up of the Shoreline Master Program public hearing. That will there we go. Okay, so a little bit of background for the record. Shoreline Master Program is the county regulatory document that regulates development and redevelopment along certain shorelines in Thurston County, including Puget Sound and our large lakes and streams. The current document being implemented today dates back to 1990. Thurston County Board held its public hearing last Tuesday on May 16th. And there were roughly 57 people who signed in person, approximately 20 citizens who attended via Zoom. And you had 34 people provide verbal testimony at that public comment period. The verbal testimony gave a pretty good overview of the themes that were also expressed in the written comments. So that should be updated, but as of today, there's roughly 100 written comments that have been submitted, and those have all been transmitted to the board. And all comments we receive are posted online at www.thurstonsmp.org. So some of the topics that were addressed in public comments, both written and verbal, as Josh mentioned, you heard about the buffer widths on both sides of that issue. You heard a lot about the use of the term non-conforming to describe existing structures and uses that find themselves within shoreline buffers. You heard requests to re-examine some of the proposed shoreline environment designations for specific shoreline reaches, and discussion of both the Planning Commission recommendation of the SMP and the minority report. Comments about how the draft SMP addresses and tracks impacts to the shoreline and no net loss over time. Questions about the environmental review conducted in development of the SMP. Calls to incorporate sea level rise into the SMP and concerns specifically about future effects of flooding over time. And then there were a lot of specific comments kind of sprinkled throughout on specific issues that I won't delve all into today, but you heard about docks and bulkheads, aquaculture, residential development, all things that are accommodated along the shoreline and are mentioned or regulated within the Shoreline Master Program. So what comes next in the process? Work sessions are next. Today is the first opportunity for the board to discuss after the public hearing and start to provide their feedback to staff. The goal today is that the board would let staff know what themes and issues you'd like to explore from the written and verbal public comments, and we'll bring back information for you in future work sessions. Ultimately, you will craft your version of the SMP that will be adopted locally. And once adopted, that will go to the Department of Ecology for formal review and approval. The SMP would take effect upon approval by Ecology. So still some significant steps to go, but made great progress so far, and last week was a great step forward. So that is all I have in terms of intro. This is really an opportunity for the board to discuss and give staff their input, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Can you stop sharing the screen? Commissioner Edwards, any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
How many additional comments have come in since we had that hearing the other day?
Probably about 10 to 15 or so. There were some that had been received, but I didn't get them till after the date, but they had been in, so roughly 10 or 15.
And when was the last time the shoreline was reviewed? Like, I don't know, 10 years ago, or when was it? Long time back, we were kind of starting on this progress.
This project really started back in the late 2000s, and there was an inventory and characterization performed that was finalized back in 2013, and that was kind of the snapshot upon which the master program is built.
And then, so when was this supposed to be done, theoretically? I mean, were we supposed to have this done in 2018 or 2020?
There was the comprehensive update, which was due back in the early 2010s, and then a periodic update, which is a smaller update that a lot of jurisdictions are doing now. And I believe that one, it was due to either 2021 or 2022. And this update combines all of that into.
Okay, so this does involve all.
Correct.
Okay, I guess if we're still getting here, I don't know if it's a week later, comments in, I think this is such an important topic, and we've been dealing with it, the county, I guess, has been dealing with it, let's say for 10 years or more. I just don't see the rush, if we're still getting comments in, to cut people off. So what, another couple weeks, a month, whatever that would entail. And I'm not putting a time, I'm not asking to put a time frame on it. as long as there's legitimate comments coming in about this, what we're about to do on this adjustment is gonna have more of a financial impact into the future on citizens than most things we do. So I think we owe it to the citizens to try to give them every avenue to explain their concerns and influence what we may or may not do. So I have to disagree with the county manager as far as cutting it off today. I think we should allow it to be open for, I don't know, I don't know, a week or, but when the time comes that there's, you know, we've got them plenty of opportunity to come in and comment, then cut it off. Because as long as it's still an active issue and word spreads more and more. I mean, we might have sent out a postcard to different landowners over the last year or so. And, oh yeah, I got another thing from the government. It's over here, but now it's kind of in the forefront. It's here and it's now. So that's why I have to disagree with that position. I mean, I know we're gonna make the decision whether or not we move forward, but I respect your position on it and you want to get it going and I don't blame you. It's been withering on the vine for a long time.
Is what I'm talking about is the formal comments, they go into the record. Because you as a commissioner will continue to receive comments as you receive comments on a daily basis. That is not the intent. I mean, the intent is not to prevent any citizens to reach out to each commissioner. The intent is to close the record. That's really the request.
I realize that, but my feeling is that the public doesn't know that. They are just, I think during our hearing, I had to kind of pipe up, there was one group that, well, if you're not gonna answer us, we're not gonna talk. Well, they don't understand the process in total, and I don't think that's fair to them. You know, they hear public comments done, okay, well then, I'm not gonna talk about it anymore type of a thing. They think they can't talk about it anymore. So that's why I feel that we're working for the public and we should do the best job we can for the public. That's on the influx of information that may come in. I have some other serious concerns and so I'm always consistent. I want to make sure that I don't lose that reputation. I mean, we have asked in the past for an analysis of the upper Deschutes River. Doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about today other than it's water and it's well within the threshold, but corporate America has exempted themselves from any review by us as a body as to what they get to do. They can dump fertilizer in the river. Urea 46 is commonly put throughout the watersheds during logging operations. And we don't even get a chance to say that's not a good thing or it is a good thing. I mean, you can write to the governor and say, why don't you do something about it through the forestry committee or something, but. And I think the citizens continually are taking it in the shorts, to put it bluntly, in comparison to corporate America. Corporate America always gets the break. They get to dump the toxins. They get to do whatever they want. They're never held accountable, but yet we're gonna tell some citizen, oh, well, conforming or non-conforming. I'll just use that as an example. We're gonna say, okay, we're gonna designate your building as, your situation as non-conforming. We're gonna allow you to stay there. You don't have to move your house. But when you come in 2 years from now and you wanna expand your bedroom, oh, right away, there's this red flag, non-conforming. And so you can't add on that bedroom for grandma or whatever you wanna do. So there's a lot of things that I think we need to get right. I think the Planning Commission did a good job. I'm obviously more in tune with the Planning Commission's recommendation than I am with the minority report, but so I'm not in a big rush. One other thing though, Andrew, I asked you the other day about the sea level rise you mentioned this morning. So is there a spot that I can tell people, yeah, go over by, okay, it's not at KGY because I've looked for it over there. Where can we find a spot? And besides the Barnacle line, you know, and I'm not contesting that the weather is changing, that we're getting king tides, those kind of issues. I don't know, I guess it has to do with the moon, maybe how close the moon is, if there's a low pressure weather front coming in, a lot of variables that play in. But just using, we always use the term sea level rising. Where's the gauge?
Yeah, I am trying to find a local example for you, so I launched some inquiries into the city.
I just can't hardly believe we talk about this. We need a 7-foot high wall in downtown Olympia built at taxpayer expense. And there's not a gauge for the public to go look at, well, maybe I should do this. 20 years ago, it was down here, now it's here. I just find it hard to believe that we talk about these things and there's no verification other than scientific, well, the polar caps are melting. It's gotta be rising, the water's going somewhere, you know? So I'm really concerned about, let's not be hoodwinking the public. Let's show them where the problem is and why we're doing what we're doing. So I won't take up a lot of time, Madam Chair. I'll just let it go with that for now.
Okay. You said for now?
Yeah, for now. Oh, no, don't get me wrong. I'm not done on the topic. I think we have a lot of discussion to do.
Okay, Commissioner Renser, go ahead, sir.
Don't know where to start, so. I mean, if we're talking about if I need to prove sea level rise or, I don't even understand what all that had to do with today's topic, but I don't know where to start. We've got the decision points that you guys laid out for us. We could go one by one through those. We could go, I have about 6 or 7 other issues from public comment that I have questions about. I guess a kind of maybe a preliminary question is, putting Andy on the spot, I mean, you know, a lot of the comment we get that has technical suggestions, that's gonna mean more to you than it's gonna mean to us. Did you see anything in the public comment that made you think, oh shoot, we missed that, or that's a good suggestion, or we really should address that with the board or make some changes?
Right, so I'm still performing that analysis, which is one reason why it's good to have a cutoff so that we can kind of get all the issues on the table. So I do plan, when we come back at the June 14th, we'll have some more options for you related to what you heard in the written comment. But there are some things that, you know, I like this, I don't like this, or, you know, that we can't do a whole lot with other than kind of measure sentiment. But the things that are specific comments about development standards, it should read this way versus that. Those are the things we definitely want to take a closer look at.
Clarifying the jurisdiction, I mean, there's some
Yeah.
things in there like, I
And if-
couldn't, I don't know if they're right or wrong.
Right, so we'll look at those, and if there are things that would make sense to incorporate to, you know,
Okay.
add value or increase consistency with statute, you know, those are the types of things we would bring back in the form of options.
Well, so why don't I just take my limited time to just kind of tick through some questions that I have, so you have a clue of kind of maybe, so, you know, it felt like 90% of the public comment was about the 50-foot buffer for shoreline residential and the non-conforming issue. And so, you know, buffers is a big conversation, but I'll just say I can probably accept where we're at with that shoreline residential for a lot of reasons that I heard during public comment. Some of the other buffers I'd like to discuss, but on the non-conforming question, you know, I think we had that the way the public was asking for it, and then Ecology weighed in and said, you have to change that. But then the public has come back and said, well, there's a law, and actually I have it right here, 9058-620 that allows it. So why, if there's a law, if the legislature changed it in 2011, like the public says, why did Ecology tell us we have to change that? Because that's the only reason we really did it.
The Planning Commission recommendation wanted to call everything conforming. And what Ecology came back and said was, you can't call everything conforming. There is a carve out in state law, it's the 9058-620, that allows you to consider residential structures conforming. And so that is an option that the board would have to do. But I do want to be clear and transparent that it doesn't really matter what you call it, conforming versus non-conforming. They are subject to the same rules. So there are going to be limitations on how those types of structures can expand in the future, regardless of what you call them.
I understand that.
Yeah.
And was there a, county manager, you said something about a like you heard something about, it might have come from assistant county manager, but I don't know, there was some compromise maybe to resolve this conflict, to try to, am I remembering that right?
Yeah, and I think that's what Andy was stating, because it's not all encompassing whether you, the conforming versus non-conforming. I think getting to the point of residential conforming is an option that you have.
Okay, and that's not in the draft yet. We'd have to make
No,
it.
no, that's not in the draft. That's an option that you have. And I think the public testimony it was clearly mainly, as far as I took it, on the residential current structure is for you to consider having that conforming versus non-conforming.
Let's go to staff real quick. Talk about, is it in the draft?
So it is, the direction that I was given ahead of the public hearing was to go ahead and make the comments from ecology and put those on the record. So it's in there now, it's in the public hearing draft, but it would now be up to the board to say, confirm, yeah, we want to go this way, or we want to do something
Go this way
different.
is keep residential conforming.
Correct.
So if it's, okay, so that confused me. So if we made that change.
Yeah.
Then what was all the angry public comment about if it's already there? Just making sure that we don't change that piece, or?
Exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, so all of the
We
feedback from
updated
that
it.
decision matrix was put into the draft for the purpose of the public hearing. And now, and to gather all that feedback, and so now comes the decision making from the board as to leave things as they are in that public hearing draft, or take them out or amend them, and that'll vary issue by issue. But
So you're telling me that what's in the draft is in your estimation, kind of as far as we can go to where the public would like us to go, or the property owners would like us to go on that point of using the term conforming, or not using the term non-conforming?
I think all options are on the table.
Right.
Is what Andy's saying. And that the conforming option for residential is updated to the public hearing draft. So all options, whether you go back to non-conforming or go forward to the conforming, it's all there. It's the board's decision. And what Andy's saying is he included all of it in the most recent draft.
Because it appears to be a little bit of confusion based on the public testimony. The residential was labeled as non-conforming. And that was, I believe, that most of the comment was for the board to consider to be conforming as residential.
And I don't know how widely disseminated it was that the public hearing draft did feature the option to call residential conforming, but it is in there. And so, one thing the board can do in these work sessions is kind of go through these issues and say, how is this reflected in the draft? Okay, we like that, or we want something different, or et cetera. But as Josh said, yeah, there is absolutely that option to keep that.
Like if the board wanted to check that off as a decision point and say residential should be conforming, we could do that.
So perhaps because we have another session set up for June 14th, if that is the direction of the board to sort of deem the existing residential structure, shoreline residential, as conforming, then bring that back with clarifying language to say, here's how it's written in the SMP, and just confirm that in June.
And that sounds like one of the issues we need to brief on in the future, as well as probably talk about the buffer, 50-foot buffer. So,
And to get back to what Andy's comment, it is all about a snapshot in time. It is what is existing there now, but if someone did come in for a redevelopment or an expansion, et cetera, then that's where the additional regulations would come into effect.
And I totally understand that, and I feel like the public totally understood that.
Right.
They continually came in and said, we understand, that, but they didn't want to be separated out or whatever. And if it's not gonna really, if it's not gonna matter, then, from in terms of environmental protection or whatever, then I don't see any reason, and the law lets us do what they're asking for. I don't see a problem. Anyway, okay, so that's one thing. Those are the really big topics really from public comment, although there's obviously lots of little details, and your list was a pretty good list, pretty much conformed to my list. I had questions about, this is a big one. So there were 3 groups that wanted to have the board re-review their shoreline environmental designation. And I'm willing to do that work.
It's specific to their properties,
Specific to
yes,
their
yeah.
series of properties. One was near Green Cove, one was near Lake Lawrence, and one was near Pattison Lake, I believe.
And there's a couple other written comments. I think there's a total of 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could point me to those other two, besides those three, just because if we can, but you can tell us how that process is, but I'd like to see the board look at those because I met personally with one of the groups who raised enough questions in my mind that I'd like to see that. So if I'm going to do those, I'd just like to do the other two as well and have the board weigh in. Sea level rise was in my list, and my concerns are a little different than kind of some of the other ones that were in the comment. I guess my concern connects to shoreline armoring, because if we didn't factor in sea level rise adequately, then we're not going to have a good snapshot of what kind of rules we need to make sure we're not increasing shoreline armoring, because that's going to create a pressure for more requests to do armoring. So the armoring rules need to really be factored into the fact that I think they need to project that we're going to have more requests because of the scientific data we have on sea level rise. And we definitely need to have policies that don't allow for a greater number of total shoreline armoring. I know that it's needed in certain absolute emergency cases, but we need to have sort of a scheme. We need to be thoughtful that in the aggregate that has to stop and really go backwards. But we're fighting against a sea level rise projections. So I don't know to what extent sea level rise was in our shoreline plan, but I think it has to be in there somewhere. A couple of connected points. There's been comments about the no net loss policy under the WAC, 173, 26, 186, 8B, and how we actually, can we build in a program to collect data and track on a few metrics, and then have a marine resources committee to actually evaluate that and report back to the board. To me, that request looks and feels exactly like the system we have for the stormwater and the SWAB. They have metrics and they come back to the board with an annual report and they tell us how we're doing, and we're actually looking at whether or not our policies are working. So that'd obviously be a board direction, but I'm certainly interested in that proposal. A couple of really specific things from the FutureWise letter. They mentioned something about impervious surface limits not being in the thing, and we've talked so many times about that. It's like I thought we had those limits in our laws, and so my question is, are they right? And is it somewhere else? And does it need to be in the shoreline plan? I didn't understand that point that they made. Similar, they had a question about water quality, and they had a policy in our shoreline plan that said that there'd be a minimized impacts that contaminate surface water or groundwater, and they wanted that changed to shall not have impacts that contaminate surface water or groundwater. Contaminate's a very strong word, so I would be curious about that policy and whether or not there's a tweak there. And then my last big category is on aquaculture. There isn't much. Staff didn't bring that forward as a decision point. I've asked about it. The two things I guess that I heard from the public is about I guess I have three questions on aquaculture. One is the two practices that are criticized, which is hydraulic harvesting and the use of, huge amount of use of plastic. Has any other jurisdiction tried to regulate that? And in what ways? And I was told Pierce County, for example, does have a program or a policy where companies that use lots of plastic have to sort of put a bond or something, like they have to basically put money forward so that it guarantees the removal of the plastics once the operation is over. So it's sort of like a surety or something like that. I'm just curious, like what other approaches have been used? And then the third point on aquaculture that I'm just a question. It's just that folks were saying that Totten Inlet was 80 to 90%, like, the total amount of shoreline is being used for aquaculture. And I guess my question about that is that a concern ecologically? if it is, do we have any control over it? Like, do we look at the aggregate? Is there a certain point at which, you know, this much aquaculture is fine, but when you get to 90 or 100%, it starts to compromise the ecological functions of the entire inlet and the water quality and stuff? And if so, like what is our levers of control or say over that type of aggregate, you know, completely, you know, covering an entire inlet with aquaculture operations and plastics and harvesting and all that. So I'm just curious about that because I don't, you know, we never talked about that, what types of levers the board would have to pull, if any, maybe not. I know that there's state law that says it's preferred use and et cetera, et cetera. So I'll stop there. Those are kind of my biggest series of questions based on what I heard at public comment.
From staff, whoops, sorry. I was just gonna say from staff's perspective, that's super helpful. That's
Mhm.
exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah.
You've covered some of the same points I had, the conforming, non-conforming, the designations that we heard about, and then there's more in written public comment, the aquaculture buffers. I want to talk about, I know there were some questions asked in public comment, as Commissioner Edwards said. One was from Joseph McNulty and the other one was from Terry Stewart. I'm wondering if there has been some, you know, communication with those who provided questions at public comment. And if so, I kind of would like to see, for example, Mr. McNulty asked, you know, what environmental impact has been done to measure the buffers, right? And so kind of would like to see the answer from staff on that. And then Terry Stewart asked, you know, are we going to be grandfathered in, or what's the process? And that one, I feel like it's more of, it's going to be what the board decides in the end on this. But I was definitely interested in Mr. McNulty's question and seeing kind of the response. I know staff said they were going to get back to people who asked questions.
And I went and grabbed my cards and had a stack of cards on the side. I have not been contacted by anyone for any follow-up questions,
Okay.
unfortunately. But we can certainly bring back information related to buffers and the science and, you know, how that was looked at for the SFP draft. Absolutely.
And then aquaculture's Commissioner Menster covered. There was a couple of questions in regards to flooding and the markings on the poles, and I would like kind of some more information on that as well. Specifically, I believe one asked, you know, where did that data come from? How is that decided? And
Great. We are working with that person to provide information. There's a public records request in for the flood data and all those things. That's a little bit outside the scope of the SMP itself, but
which I thought so, but I was like, does it mix in some way?
Yes.
And if so, like, you know, is it something that the board needs to discuss? Is it a decision point for the board at all? Like, I would like to know that. And I think it's important for us to know that. In terms of decision points, I guess. I think we heard some concerns about docks and the specification on docks specifically, like, well, like, you know, if, you know, how big is it going to be? And I'm wondering, like, is that information, is that going to be laid out in code, or how is that going to work? But overall, I think those are my questions. Commissioner Edwards?
We do have until 10, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Maybe a follow-up on Commissioner Mentzer's question about, he asked about 3 properties. You said there was a couple more, 5 properties. My concern is, yes, I would like to have you look at those too, but how many properties are out there that are very similar situations that we didn't hear about. And I want to make sure that when we review those specifics, so we can have a comparison, that we give others an opportunity to say, me too. And then take that into consideration, because I think that's just a fairness issue. So I'm tickled to death that was asked about that. On the plastics, on the aquaculture, I did talk to a party that made a suggestion that could there be bamboo used? I'm just, they have like, pretty common to have 4-inch bamboo that's big section, and I guess they drive it down in there. So what would be the difference? I think Commissioner Menser asked about, is Pierce County got something really going, that what did they do? Apparently they did something, but what, But has anybody looked at maybe a more organic solution to something like that? And what would the difference be in cost to that particular aquaculture operation? Could you actually get bamboo delivered in 4-foot sections or whatever they use? Would it be comparable? Would it be environmentally friendly? Probably more so than microplastics that break down from ultraviolet and such like that. So I think we can look at some common sense things that might fit in. The dock issue, we hear about water temperature and water quality. Okay, on docks, it gives the fish habitat to be under the dock. Now, is it the same as within a column of weeds that would be normally growing there and they would be hiding in those weeds? Does that dock actually perform a benefit? Some folks, would like to eliminate all docks, all bulkheads, go back to 100% natural. Well, that's not going to happen because we've already got society established. So we need to come up with a balance somewhere along the line. And then if you even thinking about docks from a shade perspective, well, it's got to help the water quality some, and infiltration of water, that happens, I think, with all the docks. The rain gets through, or at least with most of them that I've seen. So do we seem to always talk about the detriment rather than the positive? And what is the balance between those two issues, for an example? Maybe the fish are helped by having docks. Maybe it depends on where the sun's at. So the sun, is there every day in the same pattern. And if you're telling people, well, you can't do this or that with a tree, but yet there's absolutely no shadow from the sun because you happen to be on the north side of a water body and the sun's on the south side, so it doesn't do anything for water temperature because it's on your lawn, the shadow. And we don't ever have anything in place that distinguishes between is it beneficial or not beneficial. But let's find out from a science perspective, as Commissioner Mejia has asked, that I think there's valid points to be reviewed. And I'm going to go back to the sea level rising because at least two of us have mentioned sea level. Other was flooding, but they all kind of coincide. And I'm still interested in dealing with facts rather than speculation. And you could say, well, science isn't speculation, that's science, that's weather. Okay, well, true. It is a fact that we have a weather change. We have, different things going on in that regard. But I find it almost impossible to believe that there's not a mark on the pole, as Commissioner Mejia said, that right, that's it, right there. And we're this much closer or this much closer, over the next 100 years, we're gonna be this much closer. Rather than just talk about speculation. Because right now, it's all speculation. If you don't have a mark on that KGY marker down there, because sea level's not gonna be any different there than it is in Seattle or Westport, as far as I know. You know, the sea level is gonna rise, if that's what it's doing. It's gonna rise here, the same as it rises over in Holland. I don't know if the little Dutch boy's got his finger in the dike anymore, but, you know, they've dealt with this for the last couple 100 years. And what is the difference? What is the real difference? What's the facts?
Communities are being relocated in Alaska and in Florida.
Well, I think that
And
has,
just what you said, it's gonna be the same everywhere.
yes, and I do think that that has more to do with the moon, with high tides, with the severe weather situation where we get low pressure connected with gravitational pull and a heavy rain. I mean, those three things coincide for a king tide that floods downtown Olympia. And that's been going on since Olympia was formed in the 1850s. So things haven't changed a lot in that regard. So there's a lot of speculation that's in there without the concrete facts. And that's what I'm looking for, is concrete facts. And if somebody moved the mark on the pole, well, maybe there ought to be a crime about moving marks on the pole. I don't know. I'm not up on that. But let's make sure we get it right when we decide that we're gonna make some of these changes that we might be making. So I don't know if that sparked any more response from my seatmates or not, but I just think we've got a lot to do and we want to do it. We want to get it right. Okay, that's kind of where I'm at.
Just one last thing on buffers, since that's kind of a big topic. So just, and again, obviously I'm speaking only for myself, but I'm satisfied with kind of the residential piece. Again, there's a lot of reasons for that and a lot of public interest in that. The natural area one seemed to be non-controversial where we're at because we're kind of at that limit for the jurisdiction. So conservancy, I guess, is where I'm interested in learning more, speaking about the thing, because that's where there's been shifts back and forth from where we are to where the draft was, to where the planning commission fell, to what some of the public comment recommends. So that's where my discussion's gonna lie, if that's helpful to you at all in terms of the numbers and talking through what those conservancy designation buffers ought to be.
The urban and the rural conservancy?
Yeah, I mean, they're the same. The only reason the urban, this helped me a lot when I met with Andy. Urban and rural is just a designation, whether it's in the UGA or the thing. But yeah, so conservancy, so I just collapse those in my brain to keep less categories. Rural, I mean, there's residential, conservancy, and natural. There's really three. And then there's lake, riparian, and green. It's like a nine grid matrix. And I'm interested in looking at those conservancy buffers.
And this might be a good avenue for Andy to provide some visuals for the board too on what each of those are and what they look like.
Oh, that would be, I love visuals. I'm such a visual person that.
I've got a few more comments, but I don't want to hog the show. We've got until 10. So I'm waiting
50
for
more
you.
minutes.
I'm waiting for you to jump in there, Matt.
Go ahead, sir.
On that setback issue, I never know how to address this. You know, my family's been here since the 1850s. So when I say I have a friend, a relative, a family member that's experienced X, Y, or Z, I know people right away think, well, you've got an axe to grind in this thing. Well, that's not the case, but recently, a family member did go through a hearings examiner request on a property in which the family had for over 100 years, and it had to do with a 100-foot setback. Now, the adjoining properties, the house is actually about 15 feet from the water. It's on a steeper incline, so it isn't right there close. I don't know much about the septic on that particular area, but those were put in a long time ago, and I'm hoping they've been upgraded. Because my idea of whatever we do, we should protect water quality by always having, say, a drain field as far away as possible from a lake. Now, getting back to the example that I want to use, it took about $20,000 and about 3 years time frame to go through the county's process and get in front of the hearings examiner and get approved for a building envelope. That had to do with a 100-foot setback. Well, the problem with this property was it was only 195 feet wide. It was a peninsula. And there was no place on the property that would meet the 100-foot setback. So that was the exception that they ended up asking for from the hearings examiner. So to make things more restrictive than they are today, I see that as a nightmare, because the law actually says they can't actually take your ability to use your property. And that couple $1,000s and 3 years delay, the interest rate on building a home went from about 3% to 7% during that period of time. And so now we've only got 3 years to use that particular envelope. So even at that, I think that's a problem. That's not fair to the applicants that go through the process, and it takes 3 years to get through. Now everything's changed. We don't have time to wait for another cycle to come back around where it's affordable. And so I think that should be looked at as well when we talk about what is the time frame. You go through this horrendous process. Why do you get, okay, now you got to go spend $1 million instead of 500,000 or whatever it is. It's a fairness issue again. The adjoining property owners, they're 20 feet away, from the water, and you're, I don't know, in this case, I think it was 85 feet or something like that. So we've got enough restrictions in place already. So when it comes to those restrictions and how we do business, and buffers and setbacks, I'm very concerned that the citizens that have had a piece of property, like in the case I'm referring to, over 100 years, but a lot of people think ahead, they're working at Boeing, whatever, they know they're gonna retire someday, and they've bought a piece of property, and it's a certain code when they bought it, and all the neighbors built to that code, and then all of a sudden we come along and say, oh, well, you gotta be all the way back here at X, and the only thing, I think a citizen testified to this the other day, the only view you get is the backyard of the neighbors. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's an economic situation that's fair, because resale value, investments, and all that type of thing. So those are all some of the major concerns that I've got. And then ecology comes out, there's ecology staff that has an agenda. They know what the law says about conforming, non-conforming, buffers, setbacks, all that kind of stuff. That's why I don't think we should ever make it more restrictive than the law allows for. Because if we're going to be a government of fairness to the public, I think we should treat everybody as fair as we possibly can, not make people spend $20,000 to build on their place that they've had, that they've been paying on for the last 30, 40 years. Now they got it all paid off, want to retire, move out here and live their last few years in their dream and then give it to the kids or whatever. I just don't think it's fair that we should come along and take without compensation. If we're going to do something like that, I think we ought to buy the lot from the person or something. I just don't believe in this taking and no compensation. And staff really does have an agenda, and they make recommendations based on that agenda. So when they make their review, I want to make sure that we're able to challenge that, if a challenge needs to be.
Just to clarify, staff, I think you're referring to ecology.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so just to get a handle on the next session, that's going to be the main decision points I'm taking. We're going to be covering this nice little graph that Andy gave us in regards to, you know, the 5 main decision points, and then plus the additional ones that we've brought forward today, I'm guessing. And then I know that there were other ones where ecology indicated that there were required items, and there were mostly change in language and things like that. Are we going to be reviewing those as well during that time?
Didn't those all get done because we were?
They were put in the draft for the purpose of public comment, and now the board would decide if they wish to keep them, modify them, strike them.
I mean, I'm gonna advocate to keep anything in there that was
Yeah.
suggested and not responded to by the public, because ecology has to sign this draft or it doesn't get enacted.
Ecology has to actually accept the local SMP, because ultimately they are the quote-unquote owners of it. And
But I do have to comment on that they have to follow the law when push comes to shove. But they might say, well, we think this would be better. And that's what we have to be aware of, that personal agendas don't erode individual property rights of landowners that are trying to do the right thing and at the same time protect the environment.
Okay. So then, just what I'm hearing from the board, I'm just trying to clarify what we're gonna be reviewing at the next session. That way it's clear for staff on, you know, what items to cover and so what, I'm guessing the 5 main decision points as well as the additional items that have been brought today is what I'm hearing. And then the required items, if there was no public comment is what I'm hearing, then we're not going to be discussing. And reviewing the ecology required items and going through public comment, I didn't see really public comment on those required items. There was mostly changes in languages, so I don't think. Commissioner Edwards.
I don't know if you heard a discussion that the county manager made a recommendation that we cut off public comment today. I don't know if you heard our discussion,
The
but.
formal record, close the formal record.
Formal.
Right. We still may be individually contacted. But my concern with that was that we've got people out there that think that, well, public comment's over now and we can't comment anymore. And so they just go, oh, okay. I think this is such a monumental change to a lot of people's lives that we ought to allow that public comment period. We've been going for 10 years on this topic. Why cut them off today? Why not give them another couple of weeks, for an example? Because we got about 10 new comments in since our hearing. And why not allow people that are now hearing, we sent them all a postcard. Okay, well, a lot of it, you know, junk mail, whatever, they didn't even know about it, maybe. But the word's getting out now that this is going on. They've got an opportunity to get in and make a statement. So I don't think we ought to cut off by making an official statement of let's cut it off. No, I'm an advocate for let's not cut it off. Let's see until the comment starts to dwindle. But if we're still getting concerned comment in, let's accept that comment. I know that staff has to look at that, but what, 10 years and now another couple of weeks, we're gonna cut folks off, so.
would it be acceptable to the commissioners to leave the official record open for 1 more week till the 31st? That would then give staff 2 weeks to complete the analysis and
To the
then
June
for the
deadline.
June 14th meeting. That would.
So when is the June meeting?
June 14th.
Okay, the 14th. I was trying to find it. Okay, so the
I'm
14th.
agreeable with that suggestion, and I have to.
What time is it on the 14th?
It's 9 to 11, so it'll be 2 hours. on that
2
day.
hours, and then your recommendation is to leave it open until May 31st?
Correct. And that would
Okay.
allow 2 solid weeks for staff to turn around all the additional comments that might be coming in. If there are new themes,
Yeah.
That gives you plenty of time?
Sure.
We want to be able to have, that 2 weeks is great, because really our concern is having time to look at that technical review. We don't want to say, we didn't have enough time to look at the technical aspects that came in just yesterday. 2 weeks is great.
There you go.
And
Okay.
we can also provide that specification to the public that that written comment period will close on the 31st as well.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and I'm agreeable with that suggestion as well. So for the public, we will be receiving written public testimony. If you have any additional comments, we will be receiving it until May 31st. And what's the email that people can?
I can reshare my screen real quick, but you can email me. The easiest thing would be smp@co.thurston.wa.us. But for the Zoom, I put my contact information up there as well. And if you go to thurstonsmp.org, we'll update that website today to make note of the.
Is there
extended
a
public
spot
comment.
on the Thurston County's website itself that if they go there, they can
Yeah.
get over here and click?
It's right there.
thurstonSMP.org, yeah.
Good.
And then I'm looking at our PIO, and wondering, is this something, we can?
Maybe we can post it in social media.
Yeah, there you
The
go.
board has decided to extend that into May 31st.
Just written comment until May 31st.
And we'll also send it out to our interested parties list that we have, so.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, and then we'll come back on June 14th.
So the board can start rolling up your sleeves.
Yeah. Okay, it is 9:59. We are adjourned. We do have another
10
work
o'clock.
session.
Good.
So, thank you.
Thank you.